Well, welcome everybody and good evening. This meeting of the Services ONS. I'm Councillor Peter Marriott. I'm chair of the meeting this evening. Councillor Dinas, our regular chair, unfortunately is indisposed with COVID, so I'm standing in for this one meeting. Let's start with the agenda. Item number 1, minutes. We need to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 24th of January. Are there any comments on those minutes? No? Are they approved? Thank you very much. Item number 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. Kim, could you advise, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apology for absence from the Chairman, Councillor Dinas, who has unfortunately come down with COVID today, and Councillor Baker. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3, any declarations of interest?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, questions by members of the public?
No questions by members of the public and no questions by members, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6 then, the committee forward work programme. And I think, Mark, you're going to outline this for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, in terms of part 1, as you'll be able to see, you've had responses from the exec on your recommendations on the carbon neutrality, on the service and carbon neutrality action plans. You've broadly continued with most of the recommendations being accepted. For the first time since the new structure came in, there have been a couple of recommendations rejected, but I think that was more on the grounds the exec believed that they were already doing that rather than that they were bad ideas we're suggesting. In terms of part 3 of the reports on page 15 with upcoming items, it looks like there'll be another quite full meeting in June, though as experience is suggesting it won't be quite as full as this looks, and that some of those items probably will drift to future meetings. The thing I would flag up maybe to have in mind is that the service plans working groups, and if there's any particular aspects of those you think you might want to volunteer for, that's probably worth keeping in mind. Finally, on part 4 of the part 4, talking about task and finish groups, the housing allocations group is, I think, pretty, I don't want to jinx it, but it's almost there, and you should have recommendations from that pretty soon. We'll also revisit this in the context of the leisure report in item 12, and I'd suggest discussing that in that context rather than here. Happy to answer any questions.
I have one small one, I think, Mark, on page 7, and you talk about somewhere in the document talks about having links into the documentation. I'm pleased to see generally that we started to put document control on documents. It's not on this particular part of our agenda pack, but if you started to do that, then a more formal document control register would need to be established. You can't say, look at here, last update, the date, and so on. It needs to be a document number. So that's all part and parcel of the document control process I think we should be introducing anyway.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a note of that.
Okay. We move on then. Thank you for that, Mark. Move on to item 7, which is the corporate performance report. And the relevant pages in the document pack are pages 44 to 71. I guess the first part of this page is the commercial services. Kelvin, over to you.
Just take questions of the committee and sit down.
Okay. Yeah, I think to save time, I think we won't ask you to go through this report, Kelvin, but perhaps the members have questions of Kelvin. No questions. Okay. Let's move to the next one.
I'm doing it to everybody else now. I do beg your pardon. I can hear myself in my hearing aids, you see, and I think you can all hear me. The wellbeing activities, health and wellbeing activities, there's no service. I just wondered when that might start. Does that include social prescribing? And if so, when are we going to be starting to work back to that agenda? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elsie. Yeah, the aim is to start that in the last quarter of this year, basically. So it should be starting. It started this month, and that does include social prescribing. So that's all, fingers crossed, happening. All I would say at the moment is that the leisure centres are struggling quite a lot with COVID at the moment. So we're having a few staffing difficulties. So you may see the occasional sort of slippage of certain programmes, but the intention is, yeah, they're fully started now.
Yes, so we're talking about commercial services, and I see that covers parks and countryside. In this quarter, we've seen substantial works being undertaken in Farnham Park. Particularly, they've been cutting back some of the vegetation and opening up more traditional views, which is actually very beautiful, but also quite breathtaking, some of it in its scope. I wondered how many complaints or comments have we had from the members of the public, if we actually had, because it's quite a lot of noise on social media about it.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Can I take that one away and come back to you outside the meeting? I'm not aware of any complaints, but let me see if my ranger and my green spaces team are dealing with that. If you're interested, we could give you details of the management plan that they're working towards. That would be helpful as well.
Thank you. Any more questions? None. Thank you, Calvin. Apologies, Louise. I should be handing over to you to go through the, lead us through these items. And I think the next one is the environmental and regulatory services.
I will defer to Richard Homewood, our head of service for that area, if he wants to say anything on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't planning to say too much. It's quite a comprehensive report there. I'm happy to answer any questions from members, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions?
Just a very quick one, please. The emergency planning officer and his NEBOSH course, is that on target for the 31st of March? Thank you.
Yes, that is now on target for the 31st of March.
Any more questions? No. Oh, so there is. Councillor Reid.
Could you, on page 52, summary comment on the statistics. I wonder if Richard would comment on the food waste, please.
In what respect, Councillor? Sorry.
I know there've been a lot of problems, but especially I'm talking about Cranley East particularly, there've been a lot of missed bins. Do they come into the statistics?
Yes, there is a separate statistic there for missed food waste. And certainly there have been problems with food waste collections because of the the use of temporary agency drivers and temporary loaders who are not familiar with the areas that they're covering. So we do apologise for that, and things are gradually improving now. We are seeing some stability, but they are still 5 drivers short as of this week, and are having to use agency drivers to fill in, who obviously do not know the areas that well, and with some relief crews as well. I'm afraid they do miss some of the bins in the more outlying areas.
Thank you. I think we come into that because we do have narrow areas where, you know, certain vehicles can't get to, and they were sometimes missed because people didn't just know the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Dixon.
Yes, with regard to the car parking, it says here that work is continuing on the fine, and I can't read what it says. Details. Oh, I found the final details about the Bright Store multi-storey car park and how will it operate in the future. So 2 questions. Do we know whether or not that has been delayed and by how much? And the other question is, again, I've heard lots of complaints about the car parking fees, charges going up. Have we had any formal complaints to the council about the car parking going up?
The completion of Brightwell's multi-storey car park has been delayed, and it won't be opening until later in the year, I'm afraid. In terms of complaints about parking charges, we have had a small number, but not any significant number of complaints about the increase in parking charges. And we are working with 1 or 2 people and the new lead member, Councillor MacLeod, to see if we can assist in particular cases. But generally, there's been very few complaints about the increases in charges.
Councillor Coburn.
It's just following on from that. I got 2 or 3 really specific cases in Farnham. One was to do with a charity who was struggling to pay, and one was an elderly group who meet at the leisure centre. And I raised all of these with one of our one-to-ones with the senior management, and I have to say they were very quick to deal with it. And it was, you know, really gratifying, because I don't think the residents were expecting it to happen at all, and certainly not as quickly. So I would just like to thank. I passed the one through Annie Wrighton. I mean, I have no idea who I'm really thanking, but whoever it was really good to see it promptly looked at, because the complaints were valid. You know, it was something. It was one of those unforeseen consequences of a big jump, and so I must say, I and the groups concerned were very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
It's very difficult to hear you, actually, because I think you're a long way away.
Can't move any further
Sorry,
forward.
I didn't know whether
unfortunately.
you'd spoken or not. Sorry. On page 37, I don't know whose portfolio this is. Probably, is it Kelvin? The business rate collection. Could you say what additional support you've now got in place to reach out to the businesses who are behind?
Councillor
please?
Reid,
Yes.
page 37 is not within our remit.
Oh, sorry. Right, another one then. 8.8, is that in our remit? Oh, sorry, 49?
Yes.
Okay. Satisfaction of business with the local authority regulation. Why is monitoring on pause?
That's on pause, Chair, because of COVID and the fact that businesses were struggling to keep going under COVID. A number were closed, and we took a decision some time back to pause that during the COVID period. We are proposing that performance indicator is now changed to a different performance indicator, and I think that's later on in the report, Chair.
Thank you. I know I'm going this sort of back to front, really. So I apologise for that.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No? Good. Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, we're moving on then to the housing operations.
Did you want housing operations or did you want housing delivering communities, which was next on the agenda? I'm quite happy to present housing operations, which is page 32 of the performance reports. So the commentary celebrates the successes of the housing operations team. We've had some great activities during October, November and December. The KPIs aren't where we want to be. We've had the ongoing impact of the pandemic and the aftermath impact on tenants' incomes and our contractors' resources. The service plan, we're progressing well. All the housing operations staff undertook some health and wellbeing training on making every contact count. And we've had a very low number of complaints during Q3 and all our budgets are favourable at the moment. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Annalisa. Questions? No questions? Oh,
Not a
Councillor Reid.
not a question, but a comment to say well done, really.
Okay. Then moving on. Which page are we on for this one? Yes, page 58 in the agenda pack. Housing delivery and communities.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, your usual eclectic report from my little bunch of services. I could run through things, but again, it's fairly comprehensive and very happy to take any questions from councillors on any of the services that are outlined there and the progress we've made. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. So I just a comment really on page 59, and this is because it affects me, so I know I haven't been contacted lately. It's the planning application for Springfield in Elstead, but the point I want to make remains the same across the borough. So you say officers continue to engage with Elstead Parish Council and Surrey County Council, as well as supporting tenants. Could you possibly consider including ward councillors in that? Because, you know, sometimes I do feel left outside, you know, of the important conversation that's going on in my ward. So that was that. And then the other thing on over the page, I noticed that homelessness has increased and you have staff shortages, which has placed the team, or you did have, under considerable pressure with very high caseloads. And you then indicate that to manage the workload, the concern is that it's not sustainable. That's a bit of a concern. So what will happen, or what needs to happen, or what has happened? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elson. Yes, of course, we will engage with the ward members as Springfield progresses, and I'll make sure that, you know, that's at the top of the agenda as we speak with the parish council and move that scheme forward. So thank you for that reminder. Homelessness, yes, since I prepared the report, we've been able to use the remarkably generous government funding that Waverley gets for homelessness prevention, and also under the Rough Sleeper initiative to recruit some new staff. And so the position at the end of, or I hope the position at the end of Q4 will be a lot brighter in terms of resources. Homelessness is still an enormous problem. And as I said in the report, an increasing number of very, very complex cases. There's one really at the Court of Appeal at the moment. We're just waiting for the judgment to be handed down. We hope we shall win, but it's complicated and these things take an enormous amount of officer time to protect the council and its interests. But as I say, at the end of Q4, we should have a much brighter picture on resources. And that is down to government funding. They seem to reward the successful, and we are very successful in our homelessness prevention. Thank you, Councillor Els.
I have a question on page 62. And on the, you say you carry out organisational health checks with whom the council has current service level agreements, and that's been replaced by the Thriving Communities Commissioning. Does that imply that those groups in that thriving communities area operate at the same level as the service level agreement? I mean, why are we distinguishing between those two areas?
It's a different mechanism now, Chair. The Task and Finish group that was set up by the previous Community Wellbeing ONS that was chaired by Councillor Els looked at the way in which we could work with our voluntary sector partners to commission services and gain a better value for money and also bring others into the fold. The SLAs had been working, rumbling on for a dozen years, and we felt it was time to do a clean sweep and a blank sheet of paper. One thing, we realised that we were not funding any youth work at all, and so a complex and very thorough exercise was undertaken by the Task and Finish group, by our executive, resulting in the approval at the February Council of the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund. So it's a totally different system. So the health checks that we've begun to carry out on previous organisations, some of which we still fund, in fact, I think just about we all do, but in a different way, it's a completely different system now. And that went through the whole of the committee process and was kicked off effectively by the Community Wellbeing ONS and our executive, looking at ways in which we could indeed work better in the community with the funding that we got.
Thank you, Andrew. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next section then, which planning and economic development. Oh, Carol, you had a question in this area.
I have hundreds of questions in this area, Chairman. We don't want a presentation. I mean, basically, a lot of my questions arise from the fact that the 5-year housing land supply and the appeals position was, that presentation was postponed due to sickness, and I fully understand that. But reading through the information we have in our papers, I'm really not clear as to where we stand on the 5-year housing land supply. I'm not clear whether we are going to have an interim position published or whether we're going to wait until, you know, the end of the year. And of course, it's crucial for our appeals that we get that 5-year housing land supply up. I find it difficult with some of this data not available and all appeals allowed and this sort of thing. I can't read from here what the exact position is on our appeals performance is really what I'm saying. So if somebody could give me an update on that, an update on the 5-year housing land supply. And when it comes to the housing delivery, I mean, there's some good words here, but I can't actually see what is being done to make up the shortfall. I mean, if you take from our 5-year housing land supply Dunsfold Park at the moment, with the SPD, I have a dreadful feeling it'll be slightly longer still. So you've got Dunsfold Park, you've got problems with Milford Golf Club. So basically, where are we looking to put in those numbers that are crucial for the borough? It's all very well to have neighbourhood plans, but they won't mean anything unless we have our completed local plan and a 5-year housing land supply. So if someone could fill me in on where we actually are, that I can't see from the figures, I'd be very grateful. Thank you, Chairman.
I would like to take that question. Graham, thank you. Could you take this, please? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll endeavour to answer the questions. Firstly, apologies. Zach Elwood wasn't able to make the meeting tonight, and I think he had got Sally Busby, the business manager, lined up to attend to answer some of the questions on the performance, and unfortunately she's been taken sick today, so I do apologise. I'm a little bit of a stand-in. I was coming along for the climate change item, but I do know, I have had a chance to talk to Zach, and I do know some of the answers to some of the questions that Councillor Coburn has raised. I think on the issue of the 5-year housing land supply, the current position in the light of recent appeals is that we don't currently have a 5-year supply, and we've obviously had to acknowledge that situation. Officers are already working away on what will be the work to produce a new 5-year housing land supply position statement, which rolls the base date forward to April 2022. But in answer to Councillor Coburn's question about an interim statement, there's not really very much we could say in terms of an interim statement other than the position that we've already acknowledged, which is that in the light of recent appeals, we don't currently have a 5-year housing land supply. And what we normally tend to do, obviously, as we roll these things forward another year, we'll pick up all the planning permissions that have been granted in the time in between, as well as those that might have lapsed and so on. I think the issue about sites coming into this, Councillor Coburn has very correctly pointed out that two of the biggest issues here for us in terms of sites and delivery are sites that have a planning permission, but for other reasons are being slowed in the process, one of which obviously is the Milford Golf Course site, and I'm sure some councillors will be familiar with the reasons for that, and the other one, of course, is Dunsfold Aerodrome. Clearly, the neighbourhood plans that are going through the process, and even local plan part 2, which is now at examination, will help to some extent in terms of sites coming forward. But there aren't that many sites in local plan part 2, for example, that couldn't come forward now anyway, because most of them are within the settlement area. The issue very often with these things is around the delivery and getting planning permissions moving forward, because the real challenge is that until a site has a detailed planning consent, and at that point it becomes deemed to be deliverable, until that point we have to have evidence to show a site is coming forward. So even a site that only has an outline planning consent isn't necessarily one that we can put in our 5-year supply with confidence. And equally, sites that might have an allocation in a local plan or a neighbourhood plan still need to be shown to be deliverable. So an example of that is Chiddingfold's neighbourhood plan. There's 3 or 4 sites in there that will be able to come forward in the light of the neighbourhood plan being agreed, but it's progress on those coming through the planning system, which is going to be crucial, because in recent appeals, even though the neighbourhood plan had been made, we still weren't able to include those sites because inspectors at appeals weren't convinced that they were going to come forward. So we recognise it's a difficult issue. The other thing to point out to members, I think, is that alongside the examination of local plan part 2, we are doing work within the service to look at the requirement to consider whether local plan part 1 needs to be updated, and that work has to be completed within the 5 years of adoption of local plan part 1. So that takes us through to February 2023. So a lot of the work we'll be doing now in terms of deciding whether local plan part 1 needs to be updated will be to consider some of the issues Councillor Coburn's raised and other ones around housing supply, and whether there are sites that are stalling in the process and what consequence that has. But unfortunately, there isn't a really quick fix with this, I'm afraid, other than that we need to try and ensure that we get some of the sites with planning permission moving as far as we're able to. Obviously, we can't require developers to build them out, but we can at least grant the planning permissions so that they are capable of being included in our 5-year supply.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor Coburn.
Sorry to leap in. It was just a couple of questions on certainly discharging conditions, which seems to take an absolute age, and I can't believe that we can't speed some of that process up. And the other thing is a site like Cox Bridge in Farnham, which we're desperate to see developed. I mean, I've even offered to go and bang on Surrey County Council's doors in person to get them to, get their side. I sometimes feel that we do sit back and wait for a permission to be delivered, rather than perhaps where we do have half a chance of pushing it forward, really getting a little bit more active. And that's why, as I say, we've got some good words here, but unless people actually, pick up the phone or go and see somebody, you're not going to move things forward, are you? You've got to do this. And I think I know life's been very, very difficult, but I do think that, you know, some of the processes in the department are still far too slow. I mean, there was one very much in my ward just recently where I looked it up and discovered it's gone to appeal for non-determination. And it's a really easy site, you know, it's not a big site. So, you know, sometimes I just think we let things slip, and whether it's COVID and working at home, I don't know. And I think if we could tighten up on discharge of conditions and chasing up S106s and all these other things, rather than waiting and just saying, oh, we haven't heard back from Surrey or Naturally, then we'll pick the phone up and ask them the questions. So I think we could be a little more active. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Any further comments, Graham?
Well, yes, I think Councillor Coburn made some very valid points. That, you know, the part of the process that we recognise, you know, is key to this. Obviously, is some of the stuff that happens after a planning consent's been granted, and I think Zach is well aware of that. I'm afraid I can't speak this evening with particular prior knowledge of individual cases or the general performance on those matters, but other than to say that the point is well made, that obviously it's another factor that we need to bear in mind, is that once we grant a planning permission, say through a planning committee, if we have a number of conditions attached to that, or if there's a requirement to sign a Section 106 agreement, then the developer can't get on and start developing the site until they've either discharged the conditions or got the legal agreement sorted out. So yes, they are factors that can have a bearing on when developers can get started. And I think Zach is very well aware of that, as we all are, that it's something that we need to keep a very close eye on.
Thank you, Graham. Any further questions? That's Dixon.
Yes, I was, were you before me, Jen? Okay, right. Yes, just two comments. I was interested to hear that you, Councillor Coburn, bringing up the Coxbridge Farm issue, but I wondered, have we followed up on the Woolmead in the centre of Farnham recently? I mean, I think last week, or on the Farnham, they showed a picture of the site, which is now greened and actually looks like a park behind the barrier. Have we chased Berkeley's Home to find out when they've won 2 appeals against us now, when they're going to build the flats? And then the other one is Brightwells. We've heard that Brightwells have been delayed about 9 months because they've got, they can't get their supplies due to the COVID, etc. Is that being taken into consideration? I mean, that's clearly being built, but is that considered part of the housing? And then thirdly, he was talking about a possible review of LPPT1, and there is absolutely a need for that, and particularly the one thing which is, I represent Hale and Heath End, which is the north sort of side of Farnham, and we've always been very aggrieved at the fact that the strategic gap, which is the gap between Aldershot and Farnham, is different in the Waverley LPPT1 as opposed to the Farnham Town Council plan, and that it would be better if they were aligned, because it would give that piece of greenery that we have between the two town masses a greater. So that's one reason why, yes, we definitely need to review LP, and I'd be strongly behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Is there a question there that you? Yeah.
Any comment on Brightwells and Woolmead?
Okay. Graham, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yes, I can do. I think actually on both of those, the point I made earlier about 5-year housing land supply, because they've got detailed consent, and because one of them is certainly underway, actually those are not the sort of sites we have any challenges with including in 5-year supply. That isn't to say we get complacent about it, but I know, for example, I think at one of the recent appeals, I'm pretty sure that the other side challenged the inclusion of the Woolmead site, and in fact the inspector left it in as part of the 5-year supply. But no, it's not complacent. And I think in relation to any sort of updates on that, what we will be doing in preparing for any update to the 5-year housing land supply statement is talking to all the developers on these major sites just to get an update on where things are going, and that will include talking to Berkeley Homes. I'm afraid I don't know the details of what the situation is with Brightwells. I'd need to come back to Councillor Dixon on that if there's a specific point, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Graham. Calvin.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the question regarding Woolmead, I am aware that the estates team have been in contact with Berkeley Homes, and we've been informed that they will be bringing that and starting work on site this year.
Sorry. Councillor Elton.
Thank you, Chairman. I got several. I just wondered whether I see in the comments or the development management on page 65, the fourth point says there's an increasing number of applications being received by officers. And that appears to add to the load for our planning department. I would be very interested to see numbers so that we can compare quarters with each other and see what's happening exactly. And then we would be able to understand more fully what the issues are for our planning department rather than just percentages. But I think that would be very interesting. My next point is, can somebody tell me where I can see how much? We've got the very last point on that page, 2 very complex, expensive and time-consuming public inquiries held in December. Where can we see how much they cost and how much officer time was spent on that? And then, if I may, Chairman, there's a judicial review coming up, and I just want to know whether the portfolio holder has ensured that the risk assessment process has been carried out. And if it has, where can I see that? And that needs to be in line with the council's risk management policy, obviously. And I understand it is the ultimate responsibility of the portfolio holder. And my last point is page 68. We have an increase in application numbers. It's actually ties in with my first point. Increase in application numbers is actually put down as a reason for difficulties, and it's mentioned 4 times. So that's just to reinforce my first point, if I may, on page 68. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to start with this. Graham, would you like to kick off on the response to these questions?
Yes, Chairman, I'll do what I can. Again, apologies, I'm not part of that team. I'm going to. There may be some things I might have to take away to come back on. The first question, though, about numbers that Councillor Else has raised. I mean, I certainly can feed that one back to Zach. I mean, in terms of the context of what's going on, how many applications we're dealing with at any particular point in time. I mean, I think application numbers were also high before the end of the year. I think, but I can't say for absolute certain, that the numbers might have just started to calm down a little bit and getting back to where we've been seeing them in the past. But that certainly has been a factor. But I can certainly feed back the comment that members would like to see some information on the actual numbers. The second point about time and cost for appeals. I think if we've used external consultants, we should do with some of our appeals. We'll have information on how much that costs to provide those facilities. In terms of officer time, I don't know whether we have got that level of detailed information to break it down and say, well, it was 100 hours or 200 hours or whatever. But again, I'm happy to feed that comment back to Zach. I think the third point was in relation to the JR. Now, I have to say that isn't something I'm familiar with. So if there's a particular question for the officers on that, I would have to take that one away. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. I just want to refer really to the 2 very complex, expensive and time-consuming public inquiries held in December that are referred to in this report. I'm not talking about appeals in general. I'm talking about these 2. If they're thought worthy of mention in this document, then they must be quite considerable. And I think we need to know where we can see exactly what that refers to. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, Graham?
Only, Chairman, I don't have the information that to hand in terms of that, but certainly I understand the point Councillor Else has made, and I can feed back to the head of service that members have asked for that question specifically, if we can give any more information in relation to those 2 particular appeals.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Follows, apologies, did you wish to speak a bit earlier?
It's been covered by officers.
Thank you. Any further questions? No, thank you all very much then. There we got to. I think that probably completes item 7, is it not? In that case, we will move on to agenda item 8, which is the annual KPIs for 2022-23.
Chairman, may I just ask, please, and forgive me for interrupting, but I'm just mindful that there's recommendations on here. We've not been asked to agree them.
Which, Councillor Price, yes, which bit are you referring to?
It refers to item, there was a recommendation on item 6 and there's a recommendation on item 7. I'm sorry, I'm just a stickler for keeping it within the rules. And when we come to the conclusion of the business, it'd be nice to see that there was approval for the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, yes, I do apologise. Yes, it's on this. Yeah. I don't, I'm advised that we think there are no recommendations considered, but we can feed things through as suggestions. Would that suffice?
It's on here that there's recommendation. I think we should be seeing to being agreeing to it or.
Okay, let me ask Mark to comment.
So I think on item 6, that's a sort of recommendation that it sort of exists. It kind of only takes form if there's something you want to add or take away or change on the work program, which I don't think anyone did. So that kind of sort of falls away. On 7, I think you fulfilled the part by considering it. And I think the suggestions and recommendations, I think Kim's captured the suggestions. And I think I would suggest we don't go through and vote on each of them individually, because that's probably going to be probably time consuming.
I completely understand that. Yeah. But it'd be just nice if we could say, yes, we agree with what you're saying. I don't disagree, I agree. But I think to dot the I's and cross the T's, we need to be seen to have agreement within this committee that what's here is what we're agreeing to. It's just a formality, that's all. I just don't want to miss it and be looked at by somebody who's watching this who has noted that we're not actually acknowledging the recommendation. That's all, but I do agree with the recommendations in all cases.
Yes. Thank you for your comments. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I think we should make some recommendations to the executive around the planning and economic development, which we've been discussing for the best part of about 20 minutes now. And I think it comes, I'm not quite sure what that recommendation would be, but I think most of our concerns have been about the staffing issues, the workload issues, and most importantly, the actual, despite the staffing, and the main problem is the 5-year land supply. And I think this overview and scrutiny committee should be going to the executive to say that we've expressed, a certain level of concern that this still needs to be very close. This is the one area I think we all agree needs a bit more love and care. My doctor told me about my leg. I need to nurture it until it gets better. I think the planning team might need a bit more nurturing, but I'll pass it to my colleague Carol Coburn to suggest something.
Well, I can, but we could just do it in a broader sense that all the suggestions that we've made and the question been asked be considered both by the officers and then fed through to the executive. Is there anything, because we have raised, you're right, Councillor, we have raised the issue of, well, where do we start? Certainly the 5-year housing land supplies, certainly the stress within the department, certainly the staffing level, certainly the quantity. We want more detail on figures. All of these things we would like fed in. I'm sure Graham Parrott has got a whole load of stuff that he's going to feed into Zach Elwood I mean, we have to thank Graham for stepping in because he is policy and not DM, you know, so he's been very, very helpful tonight. But I think we could do it in a more general way than the specifics, unless anybody else has got a better way of phrasing it.
So maybe words to the effect of the committee asks the executive to note and respond to their concerns and suggestions, and then we take those from the minutes, what those are.
Just come back, Chairman. I really don't like the phrase noting, especially so early on in a sentence, you know. We're raising serious concerns here. I don't want them noted. I want them looked at, discussed, and where we think there should be improvement. I'd like to see improvement, and I'd like to see that quantified.
Can we change the word noted to respond to?
Yeah, or provide a response to.
Chairman, I've put the comments of the committee to be considered and responded to by the executive.
Does that sound good?
Okay. Probably need a proposer and a seconder if we're doing that formally.
Proposer, Councillor Dixon, seconded Councillor Coburn. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So a few years ago, I think you may recall that we found the committee agreed that it would be helpful not to have in-year changes in KPIs for the reason for trends and consistency and that sort of thing. So for a few years now, we have done an annual review of the KPIs. And apologies from Nora copying this evening, our policy and performance officer who would normally present this report. She's been working with the heads of service since before Christmas on looking at all the KPIs that you consider, and obviously the conversation that we've just been having take very seriously in terms of scrutinising the performance through these KPIs. So they're very important to get right, and that they're fit for purpose and that they reflect what you want. So in the report, there have been suggestions and proposals for a few changes, one of which is in the leisure area, where we've been, obviously, what Kelvin has been saying earlier, suffering from the numbers of people coming into our leisure centres. So it was thought prudent to change the target for that. And there's been a calculation over a number of 3 years to reduce the target on leisure centres. Earlier in the evening, Richard Homewood was explaining that he would like to discontinue the NI 182, which is the satisfaction of local authority of businesses with the regulation services, and substitute that with a new E6, which is about food businesses with scores on the door. This is something that other Surrey districts also use, so it's something that we could be able to compare against much more easily than the other one. Under housing, we've got 3 in the area of responsive repairs and 1 in the area of percentage of tenancy audits that they want to change the target. And we have no changes proposed under the planning KPIs. So happy to take any, well, I'm hoping my colleagues who know more about this than I do could take any questions you may have, but I will certainly feed them back to Nora. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Any questions? Councillor Dixon.
I sent in a written question, so just to repeat it, it's on page 86. We've got the Q2 target for the actual numbers of dwelling commenced. Now, in a way, I was quite reassured on agenda item 7 to see that we've got agency staff working in our planning department now, because these are normally more experienced staff than some of them, then you can expect them to be experienced staff. Now, we are a borough in crisis when it comes to the numbers of dwellings that we're building each year. And we can see that at every single appeal we go to, or most of them anyway. So I do feel that actually, given that we've got excellent agency staff in the department, that to have a P7 where there is no change, when we actually really need more houses to be built, and to be some of these existing planning permissions to be started and to be moved forward. Is this not lacking somewhat in admission?
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Who would like to respond to the question?
I wonder whether Graham Parrott might want to respond. This because this is about the numbers of dwellings in the local plan, isn't it? I think there's a division there, and that's where the numbers come from. So I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll let Graham speak because I'm not sure we can do much about that.
Yes, Chairman, I mean, I'll endeavour to comment. I mean, I think Louise is absolutely right. The number that we've got, the 147, I think is a quarter of the local plan housing target, which is 590, or just about a quarter of the local plan housing target, which is 590 a year. That's what we were expected to deliver year on year to meet the overall local plan target. Councillor Dixon's absolutely right. You know, obviously there is an issue that we've got a bit of a backlog because of earlier commencements or other completions not being up to that number. So in terms of the 5-year housing land supply calculations, some of that backlog has to be factored into it as well. So actually you want to see more than the 590 being delivered to try and deal with that. So that is a very fair point. I think the only thing I would just say on that, and obviously I only sort of saw the question this afternoon, so apologies, I haven't had a lot of time to think about this, is just to bear in mind that there is only so much we can do in terms of getting the things actually delivered on the ground. I mean, we mentioned the Berkeley home site earlier, and there you've got a situation where, for other reasons, the developer hasn't pushed the scheme forward as much as they could have done. And the key thing still remains getting those planning permissions granted as well, and getting those planning permissions granted that are capable of being delivered, because that's how we're measured. And yes, you hope as a consequence of that, you'll see an upturn in things like starts and completions and so on and so forth. But they aren't the only factors that go into the 5-year housing land supply. But beyond that, Chairman, I think I'm certainly happy to take the point back and discuss it with Zach in terms of whether there's anything else we could do with that. But I think that's the explanation for where the 147 comes from.
Yes,
I really must encourage you to do that, because as someone from North Farnham, I have to tell you that in the next 6 months, our life is pure purgatory. We are seeing large houses being knocked down and replaced by 4 or 5 townhouses, left, right and centre, on blind corners with no access and all the rest of it. And we've got 2 housing estates going up where they shouldn't be going. And, you know, that's just the beginning. So really, you know, you're going to hear a lot from North Farnham about this, because where the pain is happening. Thank you.
Any comment, further comment, Graham?
I don't think I can say anything more, Chairman, than I have done already on this one.
Okay, thank you.
So a very, very quick comment. I think it's just a difference here between housing delivery test numbers and also then the 5-year housing land supply numbers. Obviously, when it comes to the housing delivery test, other than our own social housing, Waverley aren't the builder, we're not the deliverer of the housing. So we're reliant upon developers to actually build out their planning consents. My understanding is that in the years running up to the current administration, actually the housing delivery test was either not being or only just being met. And so we're now slightly over delivering on that. And I don't want to give blame or even credit to us, because actually the housing delivery test is almost all developers. So it's not really anybody's credit or blame if it doesn't happen. It goes back to whether developers are actually building out their consent. So my suggestion, as always, would be to continue to remind the government that some revised planning rules and the ability and power for us to force developers to actually get on with it in some fashion, maybe by levying council tax or some other way to shift the economic balance, is appropriate.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Townsend, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you, Chair. Having gone through all these lovely KPIs, I feel there's one thing missing for me, and that is about our residents, and the fact we're not including one KPI in any area on what our residents are asking us to do and how we're performing against those requests from the residents. And I would like to see it across in all areas, particularly those where we have more detailed interaction with the residents. And I think with commercial world as it is today, I certainly, when I go into anything, I always get a request coming back saying, what did you think of our service? And I think we do need to incorporate that somewhere within these KPIs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. I thought there were audits of that sort taken on. Is that not the case?
I'd just like to say we are reintroducing the tenant satisfaction survey with responsive repairs. So within the housing operations team, that is something we're doing, and you may be aware that we do twice yearly, not twice yearly, every other year or every third year, comprehensive tenant satisfaction surveys. And with the white paper, the new charter for social housing tenants coming in, we'll also be doing tenant satisfaction measures annually. So we get a good comprehensive piece of information about how our tenants are experiencing our services, where the issues are and where we can improve.
Thank you for that comment. I'm aware that you do these surveys, but have some of our residents then forgotten what has actually happened back in those times? So can we not do it on a more regular basis as these residents do come into us and ask us for information? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you suggesting this should be a broader context? I'm looking for tenants, not tenants, satisfaction of the residents in our borough.
I am indeed.
Thank you. Oh, Louise.
Sorry, just on that point, Chair, if I may, under the remit of the Resources Committee, we have two new indicators, and I know it's probably not exactly what you're asking for, but it goes to the point of the response to residents calling in. There are two indicators under the services, customer services team, about performance, and these are new indicators, and they're sort of beginning to bed in. And I'm hoping that we will see more of that in terms of residents' inquiries and the performance we turn around on that. So that might go some way towards it, but I think you're probably also getting at other things as well.
Any further questions from members? Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. It was just about the H04B and H05B. I noticed that in the actual figures in the first report, these had performed quite badly, but it's proposed that they're going to be discontinued from the 31st of the 3rd because they're temporary measures. And I thought, in the light of the fact that their performances were so poor, it might be wise to continue them for a while, because otherwise you're not really going to get the information that you wanted, which I presume is how they're performing as a temporary, as a change of contract.
Yes, thank you. Annalise, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. Yes, as I said, we're reintroducing the tenant satisfaction measure, and we think that's the most important measure. We get the view of the tenant, how the service is delivered at the, don't want to say coalface, at the front door. If the tenants aren't satisfied, then we can drill down into the more operational statistics. Because we stopped doing the tenant satisfaction survey with the change in that, because we had the interim responsive repairs contractor, we wanted to share some information with you. So we shared the more operational information. We want to go back to giving you the tenant's view, and then we can, if we're not doing what the tenants want, and if we've got poor satisfaction that way, then we can drill down into the more operational details and share that information.
Yeah, I think we're being asked to make recommendations to the executive again here. So I'm going to suggest that this number in, and I hear what you said, it's not the 5-year housing supply, number P7 and P8. Graham Parrott just told us that, yes, we need to do more than 147 a quarter because we've got a little bit of a backlog. So that the number here can't be, they can't go forward with a KPI of 147 if that means that in 3 months' time, or in 6 months' time, or in 12 months' time, we are still got a deficit of houses. So we've got to say to the executive that that number has got to be adjusted to be, like the kind of objectives, a stretch objective like I get at work. I achieve 3,000 marketing leads and I get asked to deliver 4,000 next quarter. Thank you very much. I don't get asked to do the same number 2 quarters in a row ever. And I think these guys we have got 5 agency staff in the planning department. They need to be given stretch objectives because they're experienced staff. We expect them to deliver as such.
Thank you. My comment was somewhere along the same lines. I don't like KPIs which are goalposts with which you can move. I mean, I noticed one, for example, H04 was 93% target, has moved down to 90%. I don't see the point of having targets which are movable. I mean, strictly speaking, most of these targets should be 100%. We should then look at where we've missed the target, rather than saying, well, we're okay, we're doing okay, but it's not perfect. And we don't get a lot of information about why it is these the 100% targets are not met. And I would rather like to see the emphasis placed on where we're missing. But I know there are issues with this. I know there are things which are outside the council's control. But I just wonder, is there a better way of showing targets which are more meaningful? Because this doesn't mean very much to me when you just move a number. Any comment about that, Annalise?
I'm sorry, I'm just having system issues. H04, is that affordable
Well, that was just one
housing?
example. I mean, that there are many throughout the document where we're quoting KPIs.
Oh, okay. It moved down because we want to make it a realistic target and one that is achievable. We're not going to achieve 100% on that target. So we wanted to, particularly with the new contract starting, to try and get something that's achievable. We're criticised when they're always red, and now I understand the challenge of reducing the target, but we haven't hit that target, so that's why we've reduced it, with the aim of meeting the target and then exceeding it, and then next year we can look to put it back up or exceed the target we're in. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't think it really answers my point there, but I can understand where you're coming from. There's no point in having red boxes everywhere, but I mean that is actually what we're trying to achieve, is the perfect score. But I don't think it tells us why things are not actually, you're not able to reach a higher target. Where are the issues? It's not always clear from the text in these areas.
Within the quarterly performance reports, when we don't meet a target, we always put some comment and information in. So you may recall earlier I mentioned the fact that we're continuing to have an impact following COVID with contractor resources and staff availability, and also accessing to tenants' homes if they've got COVID. We can, as we found today, you can make the best plans and somebody's going to be at a meeting or at home and allow somebody in their home, but just like that, you have to change the plans. So I would say that, keep holding us to account. If the information isn't there in the commentary when we're not meeting the targets to explain why we haven't met them, then please do challenge us.
Thank you. Now, I'd rather just see the targets kept fixed, and then having them, like you say, if you want to change it next year because you've done better this year, okay, so what does that tell you? Tell you've just done better a little bit this year, but it doesn't tell you what the big picture is. Right. Councillor Coburn.
Not for the first time. I just wanted to agree with you, Chairman. I'd never ever understood why we don't aim for 100%. I just find that's what you aim for, and then, as you say, you then look realistically at why you haven't achieved it for each service. I've never understood why you would ever aim at 83 or 74. I believe that you aim for the top, and we know we're not going to achieve it on every occasion, if at all. But at least, what we're trying to say to the public is we want to give you as perfect a service as we can, and that is why we're aiming for 100%. But I've argued this for years, and it's never got anywhere. So I'm not putting that forward as a proposal, but I do understand your logic of wanting to do the best, which has to be aiming for perfection.
Thank you, Carol.
And in the case of the actual housing dwelling commenced, 147 is not the right number. It's just too low.
Mark, would you like to comment?
Sorry, assuming no members wish to come in further. I was just going to note the Chair of Resources asked for us to flag the deletion of, the from which way around it is, but HO4 for HO4B, HO5 and HO5B, but I think that's already been covered. I think I'd heard 2 possible suggestions for amendments to the recommendation. One, I think, was from Councillor Townsend about basically taking information on responsive repairs kind of closer to the point it should actually have been completed, if I've understood that right.
It wasn't just about repairs, it was about planning, it's about all our services. There should be a service sort of KPI across every area.
Service, okay, across services. And the other was from Councillor Dixon to raise P7 and P8. I don't know if you were envisaging a specific number there. Okay. So a number greater. A number greater than 147, and yeah. So, I mean, are there seconders for either of those proposals?
Councillor Kirkland.
I quite happily second both of them. I think, you know, to have a KPI which is asking what our residents think about our services is a good idea. And I also think that having you know, just dividing 590 by 4 and saying that's what we're going to build when we know we've got to build 147 plus to meet the shortfall. I agree with Councillor Dixon that, you know, we should be looking again at that figure and seeing realistically what we need to develop per year to make up the, you know, over the time, so that we can eventually get to the stage where we don't have any deficit.
So I think either put that to a vote or have a debate. Oh, sorry, I just did that. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
It's one other item that I believe Annalise said that Councillor Mullen asked you to respond to some issues.
Sorry, I think that was the. Sorry, Chair. I think we'd already covered.
That was covered by.
Yeah.
Yes, it was the question about why are we changing the responsive repairs KPIs. Hopefully I've explained the reason behind that.
Okay, thanks. Let's go back to the
I guess there's a question of whether one or both of those are consensus, are carried by consensus. If not, probably need to have a vote on them separately.
I think you can take both as agreed, because I don't think anyone's going to argue with what seems like a very pragmatic and common sense suggestions. And I actually think with the point 07 of page 7, P7, sorry, I have a great deal of sympathy with Councillor Dixon in trying to understand from your starting point what the figure is, to be able then to set a realistic target. But I think we do need to increase that, because we do need to be sending out a message out there to developers that we haven't got legislation to back us up, but what we have is a strong council with a strong view that if we set our targets, this is what we expect it to be. Otherwise, there's just no incentive for the developers to put a brick in the ground if they're going to just buy up pieces of land, put in planning applications, and at the end of the day, not build it out. Just wait for the market forces to change. So I think this is our way, until legislation protects us even more, of saying this is what we expect and demand as a basic standard, and that figure is, as you quite rightly say, doesn't represent that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Reid. Yeah.
I just get the impression we're talking across purposes, because at one point we were talking about social houses, now we're talking about developers. So what are we talking about at this point, please? And it isn't an exact science, you know, no one is, you know, it's not like handling numbers and figures. We're dealing with people.
Chairman, if I just made there, I think Councillor Reid makes a very valid point, but I think it misses the point in the sense that what we're trying to do is get consensus for what Mark had said, which is the 2 recommendations, approval, rather than, and they're just examples why we should be approving them, not a separate debate. So I would agree with both proposals.
Yeah.
So just agree a bit of wording to vote on in a moment.
Through Chair, what I've suggested is that the recommendation that's set out in your agendas, I've added to. So part 2 of that recommendation that says recommends approval to the executive for the proposals to be implemented from the 1st of April 22. I've added subject to consideration of the additional comments and recommendations made by the committee.
Having just nodded in agreement,
Yes.
sorry, I thought should be subject to, depending on how people vote in a second, subject to the following amendments. And then
So I
if-
can do that, subject to the following amendments. That's not a problem.
Should we take a vote on those 2 amendments, I think, because
Separately or together?
yes, I think probably separately, because so the first one was one proposed by Councillor Townsend and seconded by Councillor Coburn.
Why on earth are we voting? We're putting forward, things for the executive to have a look at. The fact that it's not unanimous doesn't matter at all. Maybe
The point
if
is,
it's-
as scrutiny, we can only recommend
We
to the
don't-
executive. We can't actually make the decision. And so therefore, all we need to do is actually vote on the recommendation to recommend to executive that they consider it.
I think so.
It's a lot more comfortable for me if there's a vote to then go and write a report that says this is what you have recommended. It brings clarity to the situation.
So what is the statement going to read then? If you go for number 1, how will that read?
So that would be that residents, that additional KPIs are added to cover more regular monitoring of residents' experience of contact with the council. Or is that, yeah. Okay, and the second one would be to raise P7 and P8 above the current number of 147. To reflect need, okay, yeah.
Agreed? Good, thank you very much.
Oh, so Councillor Dawson.
I don't agree with the second one because as far as I can see, these are targets. They're not targets for us to achieve. They're targets as to what we would hope would be built in order to meet the number of houses we're supposed to be providing. So by changing the actual number, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, it's purely a mathematical function. You've just arrived at that by dividing the number by the number of years by the number of months. So it really, I don't see the point of it. It won't achieve anything.
It will if the number is wrong.
The figures you've got the figures for the.
Yeah, but I know, but that's not the number. That they don't have to get to 500.
You've got the figures for the cumulative lack.
Yes.
That you can see what they are. But simply changing the number from 147 to one something else won't create any houses.
Sorry, could I ask Councillor Dixon, could you
yes,
could you explain your
Yes.
view there
So-
on the numbers?
So the point is that at the moment is, I think we have to build 500. We have to build 580 houses a year. 590, but we've got a shortfall from last year. And if you divide 590 by 4, you get 147, which is great. So if they deliver 147, this time next year, we'll still have a shortfall. We'll still be going to appeals and still losing them because we're not building enough houses. And we might be given another 30% from Woking at some point. So, I think we need, we have got a very well-staffed team full of agency people who are I would expect to be very experienced. They know that we have a desperate need to get houses built. So we should be giving them a stretch objective to do it and to do it as soon as possible, not just to be continuing business as usual.
What you're saying is the numbers do not include the shortfall from last year, so that should be part of that target.
But they are included in the cumulative target projection below.
How do you want to leave this? Leave it as it stands at the moment? Let's take a vote on as it stands then. Yeah.
So should we do all in favour of an amendment and all against?
Yeah, so all in favour of an amendment to do what?
To raise the
raise the
raise
number.
P7 and
Okay,
P8.
so if all in favour of raising those number,
2, 3, 5. I think that's clear. That's carried, isn't it?
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thank you. So we're happy with those recommendations. Then we can move on to item 9, which is the climate change and sustainability SPD. So I'll give you back to lead us on this one.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we are bringing the draft climate change and sustainability supplementary planning document to you. So this was one of the actions in the carbon neutrality action plan, was to produce an SPD focusing on climate change and sustainability. And the purpose of the SPD is to provide further detail and guidance on the existing policies in Local Plan Part 1 on climate change and sustainability. The draft that you've got has been produced by consultants at LUC, and we've got Chris Peachy and Philip Smith joining us on Zoom this evening just to give you a quick introduction and overview of the SPD. So I will hand over to them now.
Thanks very much, Chair. My name is Chris Peachy from LUC. I'm here with Philip, both of us at Land Use Consultants. I've just been asked to produce a very brief presentation on the purposes and next steps for this document. I'll just share my screen now. Hopefully you can all see that. So in terms of the purposes, this SPD will be covering 4 existing policies in the Local Plan Part 1, CC1, 2, 3 and ST1. So the purpose of the SPD is to make the most of existing policies. It can't introduce new planning policies into the development plan. So it's just to strengthen the existing policies. Secondly, it's to provide guidance on how to apply policies and what the threshold is for compliance. It's to require applicants to provide information on the sustainability of their proposed developments at the planning application stage and the pre-application stage. Also, just to demonstrate what is possible for development in Waverley, and to share best practice and exemplar developments in the area. And finally, just to share links on the latest guidance, codes of practice, which is ever changing in this area. The structure of the SPD is split into 2 parts. The first part provides the guidance itself, and that's split into policy summaries, the actual requirements guidance itself, consideration of heritage and local vernacular, and links to the latest codes of practice and exemplar development. Part 2 of the document is a validation requirement for a climate change checklist, and that will require developers to demonstrate how the SPD has been considered at the earliest stage of planning. And it also sets out a requirement to provide technical or financial reasons if the developer is not able to achieve the measures in the described in the SPD. It's split into 5 topic areas, just to give you an idea of the scope of the SPD. Firstly, the first topic area covers the use of renewable and low carbon energy supply systems in new development. Secondly, it covers the sustainable site layout, landscaping, layout and orientation of buildings. Thirdly, climate change resilience and adaptation. Fourthly, use of sustainable resources and materials and sustainable management of waste. Water efficiency and design to encourage use of sustainable forms of transport. So next steps for this document is the executive will consider any comments you have and will approve the draft SPD. It then has to go on a statutory public consultation period. We will then consider the responses and make changes accordingly. Then the final SPD and the consultation statement will be published. And then that will go to full council via executive for approval and to adopt the SPD. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think Councillor Seaborn, not sure whether this is a good time for you to come in, or would you like to leave it to the end of this item?
I really don't mind, Chairman. I think what I've got to say will be relevant at any stage. May as well just get it out there. Then other members can comment on my thoughts and refute them or agree. So if I might.
If you would, please. Then.
Okay, so I asked to participate in the discussion on this agenda item because although the draft SPD contains some excellent material and is thorough, I think that this committee can recommend some easy to implement modifications that will make it far more effective as a planning document. Each of the chapters of the draft SPD set out relevant policy and then have sections headed requirements and guidance. But unfortunately, the text in these sections fails to split the requirements from the guidance, and it fails to use language which would enable the user to tell which is which. Those of you that are familiar with the residential extensions SPD will be all too familiar with the problems that arise when it's not clear if a section is a requirement or just guidance. We have the 25-degree and 45-degree rules, which some officers apply firmly and others treat as guidance and apply inconsistently. The same goes with material on dormer windows in loft extensions. The SPD clearly sets out what is poor design, and yet unsightly dormer windows, which clearly do not conform with the expectations of the document, are repeatedly allowed. What we need is what is enforceable in the new SPD to be enforced in order to support the zero carbon aspirations of the borough. Unfortunately, the way the draft is written will make it much harder to do that than it should be. So I'd like to suggest that the committee recommends that anything that is a requirement is clearly labelled as such, and that the text uses language such as shall, must, or will to reinforce requirement status. On the other hand, guidance, which either provides explanation or sets out things that are desirable, would use words such as should, may, or could to indicate that while preferred, these items are optional and not enforceable. In support of the wording in the accompanying officer report, which makes it clear in section 4.3 that the SPD cannot introduce new policy, each requirement should be supported by references to the specific source of the requirement, be it from the local plan, from building regulations, from the MPPF, or from Surrey County Council policy. So I think these suggestions are easily implementable, but it would make the SPD much easier to use and more enforceable. I've got a couple of other points to make. Firstly, there's little mention of the impact that poor planning can have on utilities and services. Chapter 3 of the draft SPD acknowledges that new tree planting should avoid utilities, but traffic jams caused by planned and more often unplanned water by the water, gas, electricity and phone companies are responsible for many tons of CO2 emissions each year, and they're not considered in the SPD. The addition of an expectation that utilities will be routed to any new development in a way that minimises the risk of damage to them and ensures ease of access for repairs would, I think, be a useful addition. And then my final point is that by using consultants to produce SPDs, the council is speeding up production and getting thoroughly researched documents, but each one has a different format. So in the last 12 months, we have adopted the Affordable Housing SPD, the Dunsfold Park SPD, and now we have this advanced draft of the Climate Change and Sustainability SPD. If you lay them side by side, you'd be pushed to recognise that they are the documents produced by the same organisation. Simple things like font, bullet style, and numbering schemes differ. The internally produced affordable housing document looks like a Waverley document. The Dunsfold Park and Climate Change Sustainability documents don't. By having consistency of format and language, I believe that the Waverley brand is reinforced, and that may well be important when these documents come in front of planning inspectors as evidence at planning appeals. So I'd like to suggest that Waverley would be well served by utilising a technical editor to migrate the various SPDs into one agreed Waverley format, employing consistent language, so they actually feel like the product of one organisation. Thanks for letting me speak, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. I think your comments are very relevant, very well put. Can I pass that back to Chris to make a comment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think with regards to the first point, if Alice is happy, we're happy to go back to have a look at that and try and make the distinguishment between right requirements and guidance a bit clearer. And with the requirement to be more directly and clearly linked to policy. Yeah, I mean, we're happy to go away and look at that again. And I think with the latter point regarding format, that's possibly, Alice, something you might want to respond on in relation to formatting.
Yeah, I mean, on the first point, I mean, it is a really good point. We do need to be very clear in the SPD, because we can't create policy, what we're actually requiring of developers and what we're actually just putting forward as guidance and best practice. We have done a lot of work up to this point around the wording, but I do take the point if you still don't think that's clear enough. We did base the wording that we're using on what was agreed for the Dunstwell Park SPD, and that we'd used must for things that must be done because they're a policy requirement, whereas we'd use wording such as could or should for things which are not required by the policy, but you know that are best practice, and we would like to hope that applicants and developers would meet. I think we'll probably have to take away the point in terms of the formatting. At the moment, this is only a draft, so you know we can still change the formatting. I think at this point, probably what's important is the wording and the content. But I do take the point that because we've produced one SPD in-house and used two different consultants for the two different SPDs, they do look different and there isn't that consistency. But yeah, I mean, we can take away that point. Obviously, the comments of the committee tonight will go forward to the executive anyway.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, when you hear another councillor speak, because I think Councillor Seaborn has summed up in some ways what I felt when I read it, that great document, we couldn't be more detailed if it tried, but we have a problem with developers building houses, and we're producing these SPDs, which are comprehensive and complicated. And, you know, we're saying to them, right, go off, build the houses quickly, and yet we're putting more obstacles in their way. Now, I approve of all these obstacles in here. I don't have a problem with what we're trying to achieve, but I do think it has to be user-friendly from our point of view for the developers, so that they know exactly what we will expect, and therefore they won't mess around coming in with plans that are not suitable and then be sent off. So I take Richard's, Councillor Seaborn's point about that it's quite fun doing the revision of the design statement in Farnham, because we're having a little argy-bargy, should we say, with the planning officers to get the wording correct, because residents like must and will, you know, they like a bit of certainty, but we have to be realistic about what we can impose on developers. And I think it is important that this document is clear for everybody. So clear for us, you know, clear for developers, clear for planning people, for anybody who uses it. So anything we can do to clarify what we will not, you know, the level below which we will accept anything, we have to make that really clear in the document. So I would have thought that, you know, the terms, requirement and guidance and the alternative vocabulary is quite a useful way of doing that. I think one of the biggest problems we have, and probably the biggest disappointment we have as members of the planning committee, is seeing, I'll say rubbish, but
you know, poorly designed development coming in time after time. And we're told, well, we can't demand any more. We haven't signed up to that. We have to accept it. And I think if this document can help us say, no, we don't, you know, we have got this, we have the power to impose this, it comes down from central government, then I think, you know, it could be a very valuable document. In terms of formatting, I'm a great believer in having the same format just because we want the same, well, the same people will be using them, but that's totally beyond my comprehension. So I'll leave that to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Dixon.
I think it's worth reminding ourselves why this has come into being. And this is because we declared, one of the reasons is because we declared a climate emergency. I haven't been a councillor for very long, but I remember when I first came in, I was looking at housing estates that are being built in Fleet and in Reading, where they were building housing estates where 100% of the new homes had solar panels on them. And when it came to housing estates here in Waverley, I was told that we could never ask developers to do that because in our current guidelines, they only have to put 5% of renewables on the estate. So basically it can stick up a small wind turbine in the corner or decide not to in the end, or put a couple of solar panels out and they're good for saving the planet. What this document needs to do is to allow us to say, actually, we want 75%, 80% of the estate to have solar panels on it or to be energy efficient. And this has got, and this is why this has come about. And it is so important that there are some really strength in this document to allow us to make a real step change in the kind of developments that we're seeing built. So there really must be some rigor there. So because we can't carry on. Waverley is very, it seems to me, is very much behind the curve in that we cannot demand developers build better, more environmentally friendly estates. And the other thing in here is a specific example, is we've got the section on the flood defences. Now, this document is not going to be approved in time for this, but we've got a developer who wants to build 65 houses on the floodplain. And he's doing it, he's going to force it through against all of our plans, everything, you know, where we don't want it. And we know that those houses are going to flood. I would love to be able to force the developer to build these flood houses. This one here, this one here. If he's going to force through a planning commission against the will of the people, against our planning, etc., which he will do before the end of the year, then let's make him build flood houses, flood defensible houses. Thank you. And I'm sorry, Chairman, I have to leave. We explain later.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon.
But I do agree. Everything Councillor Seeger says is very, very a point. Councillor
Darcy.
Yes, I wanted to thank Councillor Seaborn because I felt what he said was very important, and I agree with his points. I think they're very well made. What I wanted to raise myself was the need to define some of the terms. There are a few that are thrown around, such as sustainable, which I think, you know, it means a lot of different things to different people. It would be useful to define it. And another one that I've seen is fabric first, which gets used a lot, but you know, it would be helpful to know exactly what's meant by that. So perhaps some sort of glossary at the beginning. I think that should be something we should always have in our documents when we're using language in a specific way, but it might have different meanings to different audiences. So those are a couple of points I was going to make. I did have one other point, which is to do with whether we should have actual figures for some things, because what we tend to talk about is in our policies. I appreciate we can't make any new policies, but we do tend to use generalizations such as minimize or reduce or sustainable. There's another one, but we don't give any sort of definition to what we would expect that to consist of. So, you know, you can say you want to minimize energy use. What does that mean? What's the target level that we're anticipating here? I know building regulations have a lot of this information, but I don't see why we shouldn't make use of some of our own aspirations to give people an idea of what we would expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darcy. Those are some of the points I picked up on as well. I like numbers, I like targets you can actually measure. And so I think those are important points. I have a lot of questions myself on this document, too much to go through at this meeting. I'm just wondering, Councillor Seaborn, I mean, is it worthwhile to have a separate small group to address those comments with you? Alice, what would you think?
Yeah, I mean, we have to think about the next steps of where this is going in terms of the committee cycle and what timing that we've got. So at the moment, the paper is due to go to executive. I think the meeting's the 5th of April, so we haven't got much time. So if we wanted to, I think, probably take away and have a separate meeting, we might have to rethink about whether we can achieve taking this to the executive on the 5th of April. I understand that the papers would need to be finalised for that meeting this Friday. So obviously that doesn't give us a whole lot of time to have that separate meeting.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I understand Graham is wanting to speak on Zoom, so I will pass over to him.
Graham, you'd like to speak?
Well, only Chairman, I mean, obviously I don't know exactly how this would normally play out, but I think as Alice has pointed out, the intention normally would be that we would feed back any comments that this committee makes to the executive. And it may well be that one of the comments this committee wants to make is it would like to have a bit more time to look at this. And that would then be something I think the executive would need to consider in terms of whether it still proceeds on the timetable we've got to consultation or not. As I said, this is a consultation document, so this isn't the final version. There will be an amendment that will come through after consultation. But as I said, I think if the committee is feeling that it would like to have more time to be considering this, and that maybe needs to be something that would figure as part of your response to tonight to go back to the executive.
Thank you, Mark.
So the other option is members of the committee can feed into the executive as individual councillors. That probably carries less weight than as the committee as a kind of corporate body, but that option is there if time is particularly pressing and you have kind of particular concerns you'd like to feed in.
My personal view is that the comments made by Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Darcy, and they reflect some of my comments as well, are important to get in the document. So I would think, well, what would you suggest as a recommendation?
In that case, and leaving aside whether you want people should put in anything additional, I would suggest we have five amendments you're suggesting, and then potentially on that condition recommending adoption of the document. The first one is to, and please shake your head if I'm saying something that sounds completely unlike what you were intending, is to demarcate requirements and guidance clearly, potentially using essentially the verbs, including a source for each requirement. The utilities should be able to access any new buildings easily without causing disruption if they need to do maintenance. There should be a single format for all planning documents, which external consultants can then use, and that looks the same. And there should be a glossary included, and wherever possible, terms like minimize or reduce should be quantified.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think that makes perfect sense, what you've just said there. And I'd like to offer my support to the document, because I think it's really important that we do have these documents to supplement and give weight as a planning consideration when applications come before the council. And I just wish we had this kind of document when we were building all over Cranley. Then perhaps we'd had a lot more say on improving the type and property that was actually built. It's very much the same. So I very much welcome this document, but I also think that the additional comments made are very valid, but I'd also say as well, we've all got an opportunity during the consultation period to add weight, even more weight, by commenting and making clear to the executive what our feelings are as individuals and as a committee. So well done, guys. I think this is a really comprehensive and worthwhile document and very much needed to protect the borough of Waverley.
Sorry, I have a question on the one aspect of it that we are looking at, let's say, an idealized design approach to maximize the benefits of the technology to minimize CO2 and so on. You don't put much emphasis on the lessons learned. You talk about exemplars of the building standards, but not where lessons learned are being fed back into our design approach. Is that a relevant comment?
I think we wanted to present this, you know, in a very positive way, and to say, you know, this is where we're wanting to be. This is where we're looking for new development in the borough to be where we want it to achieve. I think it's probably better to have good examples in there rather than to have sort of bad examples and say this is what we want to avoid. Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, partly. I mean, I think that as an example, we might say we might question the utility of or the sense of using air source heat pumps if we think there may be a problem with their lifetime and how much that would cost for the cradle to grave approach to these, what we're trying to achieve. That sort of aspect isn't addressed.
I probably have to defer back to our consultants on sort of the technical aspect of what the best technologies are going forward. So I don't know if Chris wants to come back on that point.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to be honest, I haven't really heard about those concerns about heat pumps, so I'm happy to have a look into that. But you know, as far as I'm concerned, the measures here are obviously all intended to reduce energy use, and it increases the sustainability of development. If there's anything that you want to draw our attention to specifically, we'll be happy to kind of review what we've included in there.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I suppose, in very simply, it's just what is the real world experience of these technologies, and do we learn anything that is useful from what's existing in these areas?
I think that's probably where this SPD is challenging, is that this is an area that's constantly evolving. So in that sense, we don't want to be too specific about necessarily the technologies. We want to make sure that the best technologies at the time are being used, but we don't want the SPD to become out of date really quickly if we say, you know, you must use this particular type of technology, and, you know, in 1 year or 2 years time, actually, you know, there's something better that comes along. So I think that is one of the challenges of this SPD, is that we want to be flexible enough, because we know that it is evolving, and that there will be, you know, new technology coming forward that we don't know about yet. And that will be the best thing to put in the new developments at the time.
That's to read.
I agree with what you said, Councillor Seaborn, and with what Councillor Darcy said, but it's the wording that is the make or break in this, I think. You know, you can have regulations and requirements, for instance, they're totally different. Perhaps we have different wording. The council will look more favourably on A, B, C, D, or applications that include this. You know, it's a different way of explaining it and requiring it and regulating it. Because all on page 97, all of these requirements introduced, and even if there are requests, because not everyone has pre-application advice. So again, that's very sort of nebulous and it isn't enforceable. You know, we can't make sure everybody is regulated in this way. So I think the language that's used, if we're going to take this SPD, I mean, is the most important at this stage, because it's just complementing all these policies, ST1, CC1, CC2, CC3. But I think what we're saying is we want more regulation, and that it is, so that's why I use the phrase, we would look more favourably if applications and applicants demonstrated the requirements in this SPD. That's how I would see it, but I'm sure there are more capable people of putting it together than I am. And you know, that might be the way forward, because otherwise you're just going to have to rewrite policy. You know, it's really very, very important that we do include all these measures. Otherwise, as Councillor Coburn said, we're having, you know, people coming with applications and we're thinking, why haven't they done, you know, the simple thing like replacing these gas boilers already? You know, there is the technology there. So I think, you know, that is the important part, that we must, I hate to use the word regulate, but we need to think about words that are, you know, more requiring developers and applicants to adopt these new policies. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I may be missing a trick here, Chairman and councillors, but from what I understand, what we're asking the executive to do is to approve this for consultation. So surely all this can be fed in throughout the consultation period, or am I missing something?
That's a read.
I would say time is of the essence, and we can't just keep messing about. We've got to make, you know, changes to our climate change policies. And if we're not going to be, as Councillor Seaborn says, you know, more definite about what we're saying, it's pointless, because, you know, time is of the essence.
Can I ask Andrew, what is the consultation period? If you go down,
I don't know what the consultation period is, but that might be. But what I was saying, what I think is that the way that Councillor Seaborn outlined his thoughts and others around the chamber, all that will be fed in. I'm not sure time is of the essence, because there is a schedule, so all this will be fed in and considered and brought back. So I'm just thinking, you know, are we, you know, this is perhaps part of the consultation, but all we're asking now, I think, or what the executive will do, is to approve the document for consultation. And I am convinced there will be a considerable amount of feedback out there to this document. So I think other things may change. It's just I'm thinking of when we did our affordable housing SPD, when we've done the affordable housing delivery strategy, you know, the document's approved for consultation, and then there are quite a lot of changes during that period before it comes to full council. But I might be missing a trick, but that's the way I see it.
Yes, I certainly think there's scope to be fed in, stuff to be fed into the consultation. I think we could also potentially ask for amendments to the document that goes out for consultation, which I guess is what we're being asked about now. So sort of we could feed those amendments, those kind of 6 amendments I mentioned earlier, in and ask for the consultation document itself to be changed.
I just want to clarify what's just been said about consultation. I think Chris's last slide actually set out what the next steps are. So you're absolutely right. There is a minimum 4-week consultation period before we can actually take it back to council to get it actually approved as a supplementary planning document. So obviously many of the points that are being made tonight can obviously feed into what executive are asking for, whether they should approve that for consultation. But in itself, the consultation is the test of some of the things that are in there. So some of the concerns that may have regarding about whether things have been tested significantly enough or sufficiently enough, they will come out through the consultation, which we'll have to do to all. So it'll be developers, residents, any other parties as well. So that should obviously, because it's about the robustness of the document as a planning document.
I think these changes that have been suggested, or the observations, are important. As long as we can go down this 4-week period to make sure our comments are included, and to the satisfaction of the members of this committee, I see that's the way forward. We can go with this recommendation with that caveat. Is my view. Is that the members agree with that? Yes.
Just wondering what I'm doing sitting here. If you're telling us there's no point in this committee scrutinising because we can just throw our 2 pence in during the main consultation, what is the point? I mean, I thought we were looking at this in the hope that it would go to the executive and they would say, well, that's a really good idea. Even if they can't change the draft on the spot, they can recommend that the draft that goes out to consultation does contain these suggestions. And if they're not going to do that, then we're just wasting all our time. And, I mean, I'm quite happy to do both, which is to look at it tonight and look at it during the consultation. But, surely that's the point of this committee, isn't it?
I don't think we're in a position to go through it on a line-by-line basis at this committee. I think that's the point.
Nobody's asking for line to line. I'm just saying, Chairman, that we are here to put recommendations into the executive, which we hope might influence the next draft of the document. That's what I thought our committee was for.
Well, I'm sorry, perhaps I'm missing the point. Isn't that what we're saying? In the consultation period, this is exactly what we're going to do. Louisa.
Chairman, can I try and sort of maybe summarise? So I think the recommendations that we've discussed tonight, albeit that they're sort of more general points that Mark has captured, can go forward to the executive. All I think Alice was saying earlier is that it's just a timing issue. So between now and Friday, we could get as much together and with your agreement as chair, put those forward to the executive, and then anything else that is more minutiae could be done through the consultation period. But I think we need to get as much as we can in front of the executive for your agreement.
Are members happy with that approach? Yes. Okay, that's the plan. So what is the recommendation? What is the wording for that?
I think the recommendation is that you're suggesting the document goes out to consultation, but that you are commending the following changes, which are, I mean, I can recap them if you want, but the 6 ones that came from Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Darcy.
Agreed. Thank you. Good. Excellent. So that completes that item. Thank you, Chris, for your contribution to this item.
Yep.
Right, the following items are for noting. Item 10, the housing development update, standing item. Who is going to take that one?
Sorry, Chair, that I believe item 10 wasn't flagged, so that's just for noting, though the next items 11 to 14, yeah, 11 to 13 were.
Okay, let's try and finish this quickly. Implication of the Environment Act, item 11, and Councillor Coburn has indicated you want to speak on this.
Not really. I just raised an issue because there was a recommendation. I just got totally confused as to why there was a recommendation on something to note. That was what I queried. I don't have anything more deeper than that. Thank you.
I think in that case, unless anybody wants Richard to introduce it and then to have a discussion, you could move on to item 12 potentially. Okay. Move on to item 12.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I just give a quick introduction? There's quite a lot of detail in here, but just to summarise, the Leisure Centre management contract comes to an end in June 2023. The report in front of you seeks to summarise the proposals of what we will include within that new Leisure Centre management contract. So it's about making it the most attractive proposition for the sort of contractors to bid against. And to that end, we sought a report basically looked at all the different operational opportunities, to be that to collaborate more closely with Guildford, bring in-house, look at setting up our own team. But what they concluded was very much that the best way forward for Waverley to gain most value for money was to tender its own portfolio separately. So what that means is, as a team, we seek to go to the market with some key things to make it attractive. So therefore, I want to bring to the members' attention that will include the agreed investment in Farnham Leisure Centre that we put on hold during the COVID, the proposed investment in Godalming Leisure Centre that we put on hold during COVID, the previously agreed new leisure centre for Cranley. So we would package up those investments as opportunities for our potential contractors to tender against as part of the process. One other additional element is we'd look to remove the Edge Leisure Centre in Hazelmere. For those unaware of that site, it's a dual use site. So it's school during the day and it's for the community in the evening. We wouldn't be seeking to close that. It's more about finding a more suitable operator, namely the school who are on site or potentially Surrey themselves. So that's not a closure, but it would be removed from this contract. And really, because of the timescales and the detail within these types of tenders, it's quite a sort of long lead-in period. We'd be seeking to go out to tender in the summer, early autumn this year, with an appointment sort of later in the winter of this year, and then giving the contractors up to sort of 6 months mobilisation to get ready for the new operating process. So really the key sort of points I was bringing to this committee was really the next steps will be fairly swift, and we'd need to move in line with our procurement processes. And what I'd like to sort of ask of the committee is whether they would consider an ONS, a smaller ONS subgroup that I could keep informed as we move along that procurement process. It can report back to the committee, obviously, but it will be operating outside of the committee cycle, just to ensure people are up to speed, and members are up to speed and have ability to comment on the spec and the approach we're taking. Thank you, Chair. That was my summary.
Thank you, Calvin. What do members feel about that proposal?
Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Calvin. As always, very comprehensively put. And I wholeheartedly support the idea of having a subcommittee, because I think this is such a big contract and it's so complicated. And I have to say, well done you for keeping to a timescale here tonight, because I know that there is so much more to it and there's so much more work and there's so much pressure. We're not just talking about Cranley Leisure Centre, we're talking about looking at the whole of the leisure centres and, as I say, the Edge as well. And I think to actually wrap that up in a few minutes and bring it to this committee for full decision is near on impossible without having input from a subcommittee that can feed through that finer detail. So I would wholeheartedly support what is being suggested by the officer. And thank you for your report, Calvin. And thank you, Chairman.
Mark, can I maybe offer some suggestions if you do want to go down the subgroup route, how that might be sort of structured and handled procedurally? As I see it, you've got two options. You can either ask Kelvin to run a kind of set of regular briefings. Those could be open to anyone on the committee, and probably in the interests of transparency, you'd then want it reported on the next committee agenda what any material that was included in those briefings. Alternatively, you could set up a task and finish group. That would have a fixed membership, and you might want to ask someone from Resources ONS to join, given the financial implications of the schemes in question. You could delegate to them to choose their own, to create a provisional scoping document that they then brought back to the next meeting. But you'd probably need to decide the membership this evening, because you need to kind of have a constitutive body to make that kind of decision about things like scoping documents. So those are the two options as I would see it.
Councillor.
Chairman, thank you for letting me come back. Calvin's the real expert here. And again, I take on board what Councillor Coburn said earlier about the function and the role of scrutiny. And there's a danger that if you have a member of the executive scrutinising their own work, it makes a mockery of what we're actually doing. So I quite like the idea of a task and finish group, because I think there's a starting point, there's a finishing point. But I actually think, given the wealth of knowledge and expertise Calvin's got, I think I'd be more akin to asking you what you think is what you want from this committee. And I would quite happily put myself forward to be part of that group in whichever way, shape or form. So I think you're the real expert here on leisure.
Thank you, Councillor. So there are two approaches. You are correct. We are on a time scale. So there is a start and a finish time. So what we would have is the opportunity to feed into that specification and procurement process up until July, when we will probably be going out to tender, and then obviously we'll come back when we get the tenders. So I suppose there seems a logic to a task and finish group if we can agree the members who wish to be involved in that group tonight. But and this is where I play a very clear officer role. But there obviously, with the briefings, we could keep that more open. And again, there's plenty of opportunities. I would propose probably a monthly briefing session for an agreed member base, and we would then still feed into the specification. So really, I suppose the key thing for me, Councillor Forrest-Heskey, is if we can agree a membership now, then we can set some very clear terms of reference pretty quickly this week. If not, we can move with the briefings, and we can have a little bit more flexibility on the membership to give us more time. So either one will feed into the timescales that we set in front of us. So it's just probably the ease of governance.
Sorry, I apologise. I think I must have misspoken then. You can, if you wish to have the briefings just for members of this committee and therefore not invite, I think you technically need to invite the exec, but it wouldn't be the exec scrutinising in any sense. Like, it could be as much the members of this committee as the actual main meeting, if that was what you desired.
Councillor Reid.
Well, I'm quite in favour of having a briefing to everyone, because if it's just one or two, those people may not be able to participate at certain times, especially in these times.
Councillor Coburn.
Right, I'm going to come down on the other side and go with the task and finish. So perhaps we should just put it to the vote and see, because I think that's a much more effective way. And as long as the communication from that group to this big committee is good, then I don't think it's a problem. And in fact, we've had some superb task and finish groups in the past who've really done an awful lot of good work. And in fact, they were really enjoyable too, because there was an enthusiasm that sort of gradually built a lot, as we worked together. So I would go for task and finish personally.
Yeah. So yeah, having thought about it, I think the task and finish group will allow us to go into detail and really spend that time. But I do take on board actually Councillor Reid's comment actually that there may be a necessity actually to do wider briefings as well. So what I probably could do is have the task and finish group feeding in and then agree a briefing perhaps for all members before we go to tender, if that makes sense. So because it's one of our largest contracts, and it will just be a way of bringing members up to speed as to where we are. But the task and finish group with the terms of reference would probably give us that focus to make sure we keep everything up to spec.
Thank you, Calvin. That sounds a good idea to me. Would members go along that route? Sorry, Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I don't have a problem with that. I'd just like to say something outrageous. I do apologise. But some of the briefings we've had recently have been tedious beyond belief. And the word briefing just fills me with horror. I just think boredom. And I just thank goodness that I've learned how to take myself off the Zoom so I can yawn away, without people knowing how bored I am. So when we're doing briefings, could we not consider some written, good written reports, written bullet points? We don't actually need to sit around and listen. To tell the honest truth, I get to the point and I think, now, what was that about? Who was telling me what? And in the end, it's just one big muddle of drone. And so, please,
Thank you.
nobody in particular, we've had so many just recently, so nobody in particular. But yes, but I would suggest sort of written updates rather than getting us all around and having to do a presentation.
So the message is we are going to go for a task and finish group. Correct?
Yeah.
And then, yes.
And a regular update on progress. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And membership of the group?
Yes, thank you. I would suggest you probably want, if you're going to co-opt someone from resources, I would suggest you probably need a minimum of 2 people, maybe 3 from this committee. We've got 1 volunteer to probably need some political balance. Okay. 3. Okay, thank you. Thanks. And that I think covers most of the borough geographically, doesn't it, as well? Yeah, okay.
Wonderful. And from this point onwards, then the terms of reference of the task and finish group, is that your job, Kelvin, set up? Yes, thank you.
Excuse me, Chairman. Sorry, I had something to say on that. Sorry, if I may. That's all right. I just wanted to ask a question. Am I switched on? Yeah. I just wanted to ask a question, Kelvin, if I may, through the chair. Page 217, extension of car park. This has been going on an awfully long time. It was getting tedious when I had the portfolio, and that was 3 years ago. Could you just explain what's gone wrong? Has something gone wrong, or?
Unfortunately, Councillor Elson, no, nothing's gone wrong, except it requires Secretary of State approval, and it's been submitted and we await their response. Yeah, it was. There were some delays initially with our partners at Surrey, agreeing the right mechanism of putting it forward to the Secretary of State. But I believe it's been with the Secretary of State in excess of a year.
Okay. So, thank you. Yes, the last item then is the Suicide Prevention Action Plan update. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a piece of work that's been ongoing since last year when this committee passed a recommendation for the council this council to adopt a suicide prevention plan, which the executive did shortly thereafter. Thank you. This has brought in a lot of different people on the officers and member side, so thank you to everyone who's been involved with it. I'd flag both the progress that is kind of Waverley specific in 4.3, but also in many ways, more importantly, what's been happening at a county level, because public health is primarily a county responsibility. And I think hopefully this shows that that Waverley's now in a position to kind of input in and support that work as well. This item was flagged by Councillor Baker, who wanted to put forward 2 proposals, which I will now put forward. And if there's a proposer, a seconder and a support for them, potentially take forward. The first one is she suggested that there should be a kind of annual update on the suicide prevention plan, probably tied in with when the when the data on suicide prevalence in Annex 1 becomes available. So that's probably annually. Secondly, she was also keen to know essentially who from Waverley who from Waverley's community service team has been attending the domestic abuse and suicide prevention group mentioned in paragraph 4.3(9), and sort of how their information they've gathered has been being fed back within the council. I'd suggest, unless anyone here happens to know that off the top of their head, that I take that as away as an action, and Phil, you and email that to you as soon as I've got it, and then we can note that in the minutes for next time.
Any comments? Councillor Coburn.
I'm quite happy to agree with Councillor Baker's suggestion, as long as we've got the resources for it. I don't mean the name, because as you say, you've got to go and find that. But you know, if we have the resources and we can update on an annual basis, and it is of use to us to know that what we're putting in place, or what we have put in place, is working, then I'm quite happy to support Councillor Baker's suggestion there.
Would that be a general view, Councillor Franceschi?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I have nothing to add except to express my sincere gratitude and thanks to Mark and to Louise, and for everybody on the committee who sits through this subject. And it's not an easy subject to talk about or address, but I think as a borough, we've really taken a lead. And I'm very, very humble. And I think you both deserve an amazing amount of gratitude for the work you do. So on a personal level, thank you both very, very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think we all agree with those comments. So we are happy for that to go through as you suggest, Mark. Members?
You mean no dissent?
No dissent. Okay, good. I think that is it. So thank you all very much indeed. And we've just gone over 2 hours, 2 1/4 hours. Not too bad. Thank you. Meeting is closed.